So one of the things that is really important is that we understand communication. And communication is about there being a sender and a recipient. So with communication to be effective, the person who's communicating is sending a particular message, and the person who's receiving it can understand the message the way it's meant to be intended. The difficulty is that there is so many things that can get in the way that stops it from being effective, that stops it from being something that is understood the way that it's meant to be understood. And we're going to look at these areas. So the first one is culture. And so there's so many factors in terms of culture that can have an impact on how communication is relayed and received. Okay, so we have history. So, for example, depending on the past of the person who's sharing the message and the past of the person who's receiving the message, how they respond to what is being said. If they've previously not been listened to by that individual, if in the past they've normally been shut down when they try to speak, if in the culture historically, you're not meant to speak back to your elders, or all of these different types of cultures and the history that will impact someone's present. Then we have religion, that kind of culture, depending on what kind of religion, if people are religious or their belief system, that is going to affect the culture. That is going to affect how they look at things and how they receive information. Then we have the social organization. So what is the social dynamics? If it's in the group, is it the leader of the pack who is speaking? If it is, in a certain area where, the social environment is hostile, the culture of it is hostile, how is the trust going to be? How are people going to take on that information that's been said? Then we have the cultural values. What are the cultural values? Is it that, you know, people should be seen and not heard? Is it that if they don't have a certain status that they shouldn't even be valued? Or is it that the cultural value is that I give everyone a chance? So it's about, what are those cultural values that people have, the sender and the receiver? And then it's the cultural dimensions. How does that play out? If it's a manager with a staff member, if it's a parent with a child, if it's a partner with the other partner, what's the cultural dimensions? How is their view and opinions on how things should be said and done? And then we have the non-verbal codes. We're going to look at that a bit later on in terms of how communication is and what it is that makes up communication in terms of the non-verbal body language and the proximity rules. Culturally, how close should you get? What's going on? How loud should someone be speaking? So all of these factors is just the culture alone, regardless of what is actually being said. But then we have the background and the context. And so this could be in a general sense or being specific to that individual, what's happened with them, what they've done previously, if they broke your trust. And then generally speaking, if someone's been burned several times, they generally find it harder to trust individuals anyway. When someone says something, they don't value it until they see the actual behavior and actions of it. Then we have the language. So the proficiency of the person speaking and the linguistic relativity. So when this person is speaking, do I understand them? Is it clear to me? Are they speaking in a way that I can understand? Is their language something that's coherent with what I understand and can hear? And then we have the mental models. So worldviews, you know, when someone is speaking and they're sharing about something, if their worldviews differ from someone else, then that can have an impact. And then it's stereotypes. You know, we all have unconscious bias. We all have stereotypes. We all have certain things that how we see things should be done, what we value and what we don't value. And those stereotypes can play out a lot of times in communication, even on a subconscious level that we're not aware of. And then we have the generalizations. You know, when we say everyone does that, you know, when we make these generalizations and we don't make people be individual, and we don't recognize that when you're speaking to this particular individual, they may not be like everyone else, that your culture or that your background has shown how people are. And then we have assumptions. Assumptions is one of the biggest things that affects communications, because when we assume, the acronym for that is that you make an ass out of you and me. ASSUME. And so it's important that we don't make assumptions. It's important that we hold off judgments, because quite often our assumptions can turn out to be wrong and can get us into really sticky situations. As the saying says, don't judge a book by its cover. And then we have also the personal filters. So these are the things that also can impact on us, because it's about our attitudes. And you know, there's a saying that says an attitude is like a tire, and a flat tire will get you nowhere. And when we have a bad attitude, it gets us into problems, it gets us into situations, it gets us into dilemmas. And so it's important about our attitude, that we have a right attitude, an attitude of gratitude. And then it's things like our ideas, because my idea on how someone should speak to me, my idea on what someone should be doing, my idea on how someone should express themselves may be completely different from yours, and yours may be completely different from someone else's. But this gets in the way in communication, because if I'm expecting someone to react or respond a certain way and they do something different to my ideas of how it should be done, that can create conflict. Then we have beliefs. So what do we see and understand and feel as right and wrong? And then that links into values. What are those anchors that define and drive your behavior? What are the things that you say to yourself and what you say how other people should be that engages you in communication? If someone violates your values, your communication will change, sorry. It might get hostile. You might get more aggressive. You might shout. You might withdraw. And that will have an impact on communication. And then we have the psychological issues. So, what's going on in our mind? What kind of thoughts are we thinking? Is our inner critic getting the better of us? Are we responding to the rats, which is what I call the reoccurring afflicted thoughts? What are we telling ourselves? What's the narrative we're telling ourselves in our mind? This person doesn't like me. They're not being truthful. All of these things that go on in our mind that has an impact on communication. Because if you believe that someone genuinely cares and they're being supportive, your communication is going to be completely different to if you think someone's trying to trick you or deceive you. Then we have the personal conflicts. So what's gone on? What's happening? How are you seeing that person because you had an argument previously or they said something that was hurtful? And then that links on to the emotional state. What feelings are we holding on to? Are we repressing emotions? Are we angry? Are we fearful? Are we anxious? Or are we joyful? Are we happy? You know, all of these type of emotional states will impact on our behavior, on our communication, on how we send and receive information. And then finally, we have the physiological aspects: health, comfort, and impairments. So if we are in a good state of health and we're feeling good about ourselves, our communication is generally going to be more upbeat. But if we have impairments, if we're in pain, if we have discomfort, then that's going to change how we feel. That's going to change our mood. That's going to change how we express ourselves. And so all of these factors are things that we don't often consider when we're thinking about communication. But each of these areas plays a unique role in how we communicate. And this is why effective communication can be very difficult at times to manifest.